Gonna test you.
Okay,
See, I'll unplug this and put the headphones in 1 second. Let's see. Hear me with this?
yeah, I hear you.
Is that seems like you shorten them up, but what about now?
Yeah. What your new computer? Is it your computer a Mac?
No, it's a Dell.
Oh, it's a Dell. Okay. Okay. I lost your video.
Okay, I'll put it back. I'm sorry, I just took it out here.
Okay, let's do this thing. All right. For the radio audience, please tell us who you are, where you are right now, and what your main hope is in creating music.
Well, my name is Cleve Francis. I guess, scientist, musician. I'm a cardiologist, but I'm also a musician. I've been that since I was a kid and back in Louisiana, and I've stayed with both of these things. I went on and finished my education, but I also kept my music going at every phase of my life. This was part of my life. This is who I am, and whatever was going on at the time, I reacted to it musically and wrote songs, covered songs, and I said a musician scientist is probably as close as I can get it.
I think there takes a certain stubbornness and maybe obsessiveness to uh, keep doing something even when a dream maybe seems to have passed you by, right? When you've devoted yourself to helping people with heart issues, you have a thriving practice, and yet a lot of folks don't realize that this guy was in the big time in Nashville for a few years,
Yes.
and where I learned about you was this beautiful reissued deluxe folk record called Beyond the Willow Tree. That's, as you mentioned when we were talking earlier, it's over 50 years old, and yet it feels just like exactly what I need right now. Your voice is just this beautiful storytelling conduit, and you bring this to the world now, and that's what I think is so beautiful about the digital world we're in. It's messy, and it's a bit tough for artists to make it, but you also get to discover lost gems from living artists like yourself that I would never been
Yes.
able to find otherwise.
Well, I tell people all the time, writing music and creating music is like giving birth to a baby. You know,
Uh-huh.
it has a life of its own after a while. You take care of it and you mix it well and you write it well. And once you set it out there, it has a life of its own. So 50 years ago, I wrote that song and it's alive today and pertinent to people. And that's the way, I try to deal with timeless music that's always going to be relevant to where somebody else is. And
So
that's
yeah,
where I was when I wrote it. Yes.
and a lot of it was recorded when you were a medical student at William and Mary, right, in
No,
Williamsburg.
I was a graduate student.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to the Medical College of Virginia for my doctorate in medicine, but I was a graduate student in biology. So I wasn't even a doctor yet. I was singing on the street and was a street musician and people actually, one of my best friend who was a college professor at William and Mary actually raised money, used some of his own money and raised money from some of his colleagues to make that recording. I didn't have the
Amazing.
funds. I didn't have the funds to do the recording, and he said, "No, you've got to record this." And so I recorded, and I left William and Mary, went on to medical school, and sold a few copies to my classmates. But we got about 250 copies made. But it was incredible.
You know, I was able to talk to an amazing musician who was the guitar player in the Meters, the famous New Orleans funk band. Um, uh, no Nocentelli is his last name, Leo Nocentelli. Um, and he also had this lost folk record, folk soul. It's like this sort of
Yes,
lost genre that honestly is like the music that I make with my band. And people like you have been doing this for 50 years, but it never kind of reached younger listeners until now. And he did this record called Another Side, where you have this guy who's in this famous funk band doing songs like almost like James Taylor and
yes, yes,
Simon and Garfunkel. And a lot of, African American artists didn't get the chance to be heard as storytellers, as folk musicians. It would had to be, rock and roll or funk or pop or R&B, or they sort of would get lost. I mean, Bill
yes.
Withers might be one of the only ones who
Only
could
one
sit
is,
on
yeah,
he sat on the stool with his acoustic guitar.
Richie Havens.
Right.
Yeah, because somebody actually sent this record out to Electra and Atlantic, all these big folk
Mm-hmm.
companies, and I have the letters. They all rejected. Well, we have no use for this at this time, and then yet, some of these younger folk reviewing it now think that it was on par with some of the other stuff that was out there, but they didn't accept that, from Black artists.
When you talk about soul folk, I think is the genre that you are trying to pen, which I love.
Yeah.
Uh, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's rooted in, B.B. King, Sam Cooke,
Uh-huh.
the Temptations, James Brown, and gospel music, Mahalia Jackson, and it's all those soul runs. It's like uh, if you listen to Peter, Paul, and Mary, and you listen
Uh-huh.
to, you see it's sort of a clinkier sound, or even like country music. It has a more nasal sound. This is like from the right out of the gospel church, and
Right.
and it's about the Black experience. I was say these the songs that I did write was from that, and even when I sang both sides now, and some of the folks, and I gave it that same sort of a gospel feel to it.
And it's beautiful. I mean, the Joni Mitchell song is just gorgeous, and um, it's amazing how these simple recordings from the late 60s, maybe I'm biased, but if I could get in a time machine, I would just go back to about 66 to 70, maybe specifically 68 and 69. It just felt like magic was being recorded everywhere all the time. Like there's this special socially conscious feeling, that there's hope, that the civil rights movement is taking hold finally. But the softness in which you interpret some of these covers, it's Little Green Apples is another example, the OC Smith hit from 68. It's like it's a completely new song in your voice that
Yeah.
is should have been heard in a different way. And it's
Well,
it's
I do
it's a beautiful interpretation.
a lot of covers, and I try to put my own interpretation, into the covers. And back then we were playing with that whole thing was recorded with just three instruments: a bass, a rhythm guitar, and a lead guitar. And it was as though you were in the club, you're in the coffee house. So
Right.
I've been to Nashville with the 24, 48 track studios, and
Yeah.
that whole thing, and it works. But back then this stuff also worked, but this was about as closest to what you would hear if you actually heard the artist in person. This was like a live performance on these recordings.
Where were you recording it specifically? In a little studio in Williamsburg?
No, there was a Norfolk Sound Studios. We found a studio in Norfolk and one in Richmond, and the guy, he had a little tiny studio, and it was tapes. wasn't the digital recordings when everybody was hooked up to a mic, and so this was recorded in real time. It was not like I came back and did my vocals later. I mean,
Yeah.
did all this in one setting. So, the words and the feelings were there, and I wasn't reading lyric. I didn't have a lyric sheet. I had written these songs and I knew these songs, and I was close my eyes and was singing it.
Well, the earnestness, the feeling that you really care about these songs really shines,
Thank you.
Especially in the last few days here in LA where it's been torrential storms. I kept listening to that Gordon Lightfoot cover, Early Morning Rain. It just
Oh yeah.
felt like the soundtrack to our last few weeks here. It just felt so right.
Well, I did a song called Rain, the Jose Feliciano's Rain. So you might want to play that one.
I know there's multiple Rain songs on that record.
Yeah.
Everyone should listen to this Beyond the Willow Tree compilation. It's just my favorite record I've discovered this year so far. So, but let's go back to your Nashville period because there's some fun stuff there. It's definitely big and sparkling and much more polished, which sometimes
Yeah.
is not a good thing. But I love that song Walkin'. I think it's really fun, man. I think it
Well,
felt
walking.
like something that again could be a throwback that Garth Brooks 90s sound, which is kind of coming back now. I think a lot of people would receive that right now.
Well, Walking was a great song written by Will Robinson, and we really thought that song would give me entree into the Nashville country music. But I was fighting a lot of other stuff other than just being a musician when I went to Nashville. So, but that song is now in the African American Museum of History and Culture in Washington D.C. in the country music section as part of Black Heritage. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, so that record came out in 93. You had Tourist in Paradise 92.
Right.
And you received obviously some pushback, but also a lot of folks like Garth Brooks and other people I think were very kind to you and I think saw that you could really stand on your own in this very cutthroat world.
Right. Yeah, I thought Jimmy Bowen, who signed me to Capitol, thought I could, but I just never could convince country radio to play my music, and so like I said, you give birth to these songs. People are now discovering my music now, long after I've gone, and that's one of the good things about digital and putting it up there. It's coming back. People are like, God, I didn't know you did this. I didn't, So it's a lot of good stuff that will be forever available.
Let's go back to your upbringing in Louisiana. What's the town that you were born in?
Jennings, Louisiana, which is
Jennings.
in Acadiana. It's between Lake Charles and Lafayette, where the Zydeco people come from, and that whole area was settled by French Canadians. They're called Cajuns, so they speak a little French, and there's some Haitian people there, and crawfish and gumbo and good food, and a lot of blues and jazz and gospel and country music in that area. So I grew up there in a completely segregated environment, and taught myself to play the guitar, and decided I wanted to not pick the guitar, but I wanted to accompany myself, and I started writing songs.
You actually tried to construct a guitar out of like a cigar box
My
and
father smoked King Edward cigars, and these
all right.
boxes, you can run a car over them. So I took that and made a body of the guitar and put a piece of wood as the neck and used my mother's window screen wire for strings. And I did that for about a year or so. I guess my mother decided I was destroying the house, and she decided to save money to buy a guitar. And I always tell the story. She saved quarters in a jar for a year to
Wow.
make a down payment on a $25 guitar, and bought that on credit, and so she wanted me to have that. And she said, if your grades fall, I'm going to take this from you. So that might be why I ended up being a doctor, so I could maybe keep playing my guitar.
What was the music that your parents were listening to when you were growing up?
Oh, they were listening. My father's favorite singer was Hank Williams. I mean, he loved Hank Williams, and
Hmm.
but they were listening to James Brown. They were listening to B.B. King. We were a very religious family, so we listened to a lot of gospel music. Ray Charles was like with the Five Blind Boys. He wasn't on his own at that point, and a
Hmm.
lot of Sam Cooke music. Jerry Butler. It was incredible.
Yeah, I did that drive once, basically from New Orleans, then up through Mississippi, and then, Arkansas. It's insane the amount of talent from both black and white artists
Oh
that
yeah,
came from that, up through Memphis. I mean, it's just frightening how fertile that area was of people just creating the music that is listened to around the world, that I think is maybe the bedrock of what American music is: blues, soul, rock and roll.
but
Um,
it comes from a bit of suffering.
yeah.
You're in suffering. I know the song I wrote, "The Willow Tree," which really caught people's eye was, whenever I had anything bother me, I would go sit under this giant willow and with my guitar and write songs and think about, my own life. But it was always a struggle, and that's where some of the greatest music came from, is the struggle of the deep South and the poor and country people, black or white. I mean, you're in the same struggle. You have the same, hopes and fears, for your family, and that's where that music comes from.
I mean, your trajectory from that environment to, you know, having a cardiology practice is pretty unique, right? I mean, and being a country artist, this double life in a way. But I can't imagine there were many folks that you looked up to that you saw that were
No,
doctors.
no. As a matter of fact, I saw the first doctor I ever saw I was at Southern University in Baton Rouge in student health, and I went in there and I saw this older black doctor. Actually had gone to Howard University, I think, in Washington D.C., and I just was totally amazed. I had no idea you could even become that. And I actually that next week I changed my major to to pre medical
Wow.
biology, and I decided at that point that's where I was going to go. And luckily, one of the courses that we had to take was humanities, and the head of the music department took it, and a guy by the name of Dr. Hugh Perkins, and he said, "You guys have come to this university to get something, but what did you bring us?" And he said, "I'm going to give you all 15 minutes. If you're a writer or you're a musician, I want you to come to my office and tell me what you do." And I brought my little guitar that with my mother had brought me reluctantly, and played some songs for him. And matter of fact, he canceled the rest of his day. He told his secretary to get a tape recorder, and I was in there, maybe almost 24 hours. And he said, "You're singing folk music," and he said, "I hope you don't give this up." And I promised him that I wouldn't, and that's why when I got to William and Mary, I was took my guitar because I had been vetted by this great professor.
I know, it's like in another universe, maybe you would have been in the Greenwich Village scene, you know,
Yes,
um, and the Gaslight with Bob Dylan and Ramblin' Jack Elliott, and uh, there's no reason why your life almost could have gone in this totally different direction, and yet,
yes.
I think what you've done, obviously, in your medical practice and keeping your music is doubly important, maybe. And sometimes uh one dream fading out is not a bad thing in a way.
But yeah, I never set out like from Louisiana, said I'm going to be a musician. I guess I could have, but if you're poor and you come from that kind of background and you have the opportunity, you want more assurance. Like if I spend 4 years doing this, I'm going to get a medical degree. If I spend 2 years doing this, I'm going to get a master's degree. And what I did, I was able to support my own music, and I wasn't dependent on anybody else to support it. So I was able
Right.
to make my own recordings that actually serve as an audition for me to get a record deal. So I never really went to Nashville knocking on any doors. I mean, they actually contacted me after they saw my video, Love Light video on CMT.
Yeah, you financed your own video. I mean, that's a pretty indie rock move in a way. It's
Yes.
like people now are used to, we have to make our own stuff and try to get it out there. But you kind of came from the side door into the country music establishment, and they had to pay attention because it was like,
Yeah,
an
I felt
interesting
like
video.
I was doing some really good music in that song. Love Light was a great song, and it was a great video. So I actually flew to Nashville and met with the people at CMT, and they told me, well, we normally don't play independent videos here, but this one is so good, we're going to see what happens. So when they put it on CMT, I mean, it got into the top 10, and that's when, like 19 million people writing in. And so I was in the same rotation with Garth Brooks, Vince Gill, and Reba McEntire. And so that's when they said, well, who is this guy? This black guy with his cowboy hat on. So they contacted me. And so that, got my record deal.
Yeah, the other song that I was loving was Traveling Man, which is off Love Light. And I'm not sure if you've ever thought of this, but I feel like you also could have been on a tour with like Jimmy Buffett and like Willie
Yeah.
Nelson. It's like there's definitely this sort of tropical good time feeling, which maybe again like didn't fit in that Southern boy vibe, but it feels really good, like to listen to
I
that
could,
song.
what I said, I was almost a chameleon when it came to music. I studied it so much, and I heard some of I think the greatest artists. Without imitating, I could do it all. I mean, I was like one of those artists. I think that I could do rock, blues, folk, and I guess I may have been ahead of my time at that time because being black, out of the category, out of the so I was out there, and I think people are beginning to look at my work of music and beginning to see that I was a unique artist in that sense, and maybe before my time.
In that song Traveling Man, you talk about walking on the you talk about walking on the sands of Waikiki.
Oh yeah.
Is there a certain place you travel to that you could see moving one day if you ever actually fully retire?
Well, if I totally retired, I'd probably move to Italy.
All right, there you go.
I love Italy, but I probably live there. But I was a big fan of the Everly Brothers, man. I was like, there was nobody. Matter of fact, when I got to college, I was a big Beatle fan, and it was an all black college, and I was like scared to tell people that I was into Beatles. I mean, so one of my classmates asked me, said, "What do you think of the Beatles?" I said, I like them. So he said, I like them too. So we got to be pretty good buddies, and
Yeah,
you had to be into James Brown and the Temptations,
right.
and I've always been out of category, like when I went to Nashville, people were like, how did you get into country music? Or black people ask me, how are you into country music? And I'm from the country. I mean, you need to go to
Yeah.
Jennings and see what that is, and so I never let these categories, stop me from loving music. Music is magic, so I loved it all.
When you treat your patients now, um, do you ever recommend music to them as part of like therapy or part of treatment?
Well, most of my patients know about my music career, so they all they all have my music, and they come to my concerts, and and that's been an interesting thing too. I was wondering how people trust you and trust you with their lives, and also follow you as a musician as well, and that's always but when I'm doing my music, I'm totally into it. When I'm doing my cardiology, I'm totally into it. So, and I think both are life-saving genres, You can save a man's life, but if you take away art and music and paintings, what do you got? So I would give him the whole package actually.
Yeah, when I first moved to LA, the doctor that I had, uh, he was also a pedal steel player and a slide guitar player, and
Oh
I
yeah.
saw these signed pictures of like the Rolling Stones and people on his wall at the office in Santa Monica, and I was like, "Are you a musician?" He's like, "Yeah," and we actually ended up like jamming a few times,
Oh
like
yeah.
at his like back shed in his compound up in Bel Air. It's pretty funny.
I had a
So,
patient of mine who one of her last wishes was she was dying of I guess cancer and heart failure. But I had a show at the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia, and she made her friends call an ambulance in a hospital bed and bring her into the venue.
oh
And
man,
she was only able to stay the first half. And the last thing I remember is her alive. She's waving as she's being rolled out of the venue.
wow.
It was that kind of commitment. I mean, I love it.
When you covered songs, when you covered subjects like Martin Luther King and his fall, in
Right.
that uh, song "Ballad of Martin Luther King," um, did you feel like um, you were part of the civil rights movement through music, or was it more interpreting the time just as an artist?
No, I was part of it. Actually, I graduated from high school in 1963, and that was the time they had the March on Washington. And you have to realize, if you're from Jennings, Louisiana, and you're black, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. You graduate from high school. High school sort of protects you. You're there, but once you finish, you're out there in the world. Either you're going to go back to pruning trees and picking up trash, or join the military, or you're going to go on with your career. And there's no financial support. There's no nothing. And I was pretty much a fan of Dr. King, who was opening the way. And once I got in school, I never got out. I mean, because his struggle was getting us the opportunity to attend these schools, but somebody had to be ready to attend them when they opened the doors. And I was going to be one of those people, and so I didn't, go out. I wasn't a marcher or nothing like that, but I was fulfilling the dream of Dr. King, going to finish college, going to the College of William and Mary. I was the first Black graduate student
Hmm.
to set foot on the campus, and I was the one of the two Blacks in my medical school class, and the first cardiology fellow at the George Washington University. So I was paving, those doors that were open. So Martin Luther King's was very important to me. So I've written several songs on Dr. King. Um, there was one on YouTube called it's a Cleve Francis Martin that was recorded by Warner Brothers in a 200 voice choir, and it had
Mm.
Holly Woodson of the Temptations and all these Yolanda Adams as gospel artists on it. So this was my song. That was the second song I wrote of Martin. The first one was the one on Beyond the Willow Tree that I wrote when I was at William Mary, and wrote that the day he was assassinated.
Mm. I can't even imagine what it would have felt like seeing not just Martin, but all these people cut down in their prime as they were trying to change the world. I mean, that time was so fraught with both hope and this sliding back, this whiplash effect of the, white society tearing
Well,
progress
if you look
backwards.
at from slavery, I mean, when blacks came over in 1619 in Jamestown, and we were just regarded above a common beast. I mean, we weren't,
Right.
like a dog or a cat or a cow, and to have been given your freedom and it taken back during the Jim Crow, and then to be denied, to vote, denied going into schools. I There were only two schools I could attend when I left Louisiana. It was Grambling College and Southern University. It was illegal to go to LSU. So you're fighting against those kind of things, like with your hand behind your back, but I hope that my life has been a illustration of what you can do if you get focused, and you can be an artist, you can be a doctor. And I speak to kids now, and I had a program called Dream Big, here in Northern Virginia. We were trying to say, like, okay, I came from the same background. I mean, you have to do this. Like, you got to set your GPS at success. And
Mm.
no matter where you go, the GPS, you push on the button, it always will redirect you back in the direction you should be going in. And I did that when I went to country music. I did that my whole career, and we'll continue to do that.
But I think it also takes some balls and some ego, right, to be the person that you are, saying, I'm going to be the first guy here, right? I'm going to be the person to break down the door. I'm going to finance this music video myself. I'm going to be a country artist, a doctor, where I didn't see anybody before me doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? I think you have to have the confidence in yourself, in your own abilities to really do that.
Well, I have to give that to my mother. My mother was a lady by the name of Mary Francis, who had, more balls than anybody. she was my mentor, and she said, you don't really let anybody determine what you're going to be. You can't be everything, but if you decide on something, let people know you're coming through. Move out my way if you even got to go around you. And so I felt safe. I think my mother had instilled an ego in me and my 5 sisters, that we were somebody, we were important, we were smart, and you fighting up, you like salmon swimming against the current, but you're only going to get one life, and you can't wait in line for people to say, okay, not this year, next year, and every year you get older. So I figured, what I'm going to do. There was a point where my voice was gonna fade, and if I listened to the people in Nashville or whatever, I never would sing again. So it's like, hey,
Right.
people come in, I finance it myself, and it turns out that I am a bona fide artist. Here and overseas. I also had fans in England and Scotland and all over the place.
That cover, Getting Ready for Tomorrow, also feels like you see the whole world ahead of you still, which is really beautiful. Yes.
But the thing with me, I never came out an angry man of all the stuff that's happened to me and my family. My mother was very adamant about us not being angry, because being angry and hostile can take away your forward movement, might get yourself in trouble. And I always felt, and that's why I was glad I went into medicine, because I see human beings as all the same. They just covered with different skin. But underneath, I can see, I know what it looks like. I know what your heart looks like. I know what you take the skin off. I know what it looks like. And it's basically all the same. And that's what I've proven, and I love people, and I never take sides. And, you can believe politically what you want to. You can be of different religion, race, but we're all basically the same.
What did your father do when you were growing up?
He was a common laborer. He was, he'd wait at the railroad track for people to whistle to him to work for a day. It's day labor. My parents, between them, didn't have a 5th grade education. They were sharecroppers, and they had to stop school and pick cotton and when the crops were in. And so they were adamant about us getting an education. Man, education will set you free. This is how you get freedom, and that's true. I wouldn't have produced any music had I not been educated.
Well, it's hard to believe that there are folks, who are my parents' age, people who grew up in the 50s and 60s, who have a first person account of the level of segregation that still existed, especially in the South. It
Oh
feels
yeah,
like when we talk about it, oh, it's like another time way back in the olden days. It's like this is your childhood. This is something
I
that you
grew up, man.
experienced every day.
You were on one side of the track, and actually, I walked in a place once to get some matches. I asked for, and I got knocked out because I didn't see the white only sign, and and you couldn't go to the movie theater. You know you couldn't drink at fountains, and actually being a doctor, it was interesting because when I was a kid, you couldn't go into a doctor's office, and we couldn't even use the local hospital that was in our town. We had to go 44 miles away if you're black to get treated.
So messed up.
Yeah, that was, and but I formed an interracial, uh, multicultural practice. So my practice had blacks, white, Jews, Muslims in it. So very successful in all of Virginia. So I was able to accomplish that as well.
I always remember the story that my grandfather, who's Jewish, told me about. He was a brilliant guy who survived polio. He was, basically told he was never going to walk again. He somehow got out of it and wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, working in the space program and all that. And he just was dead set on, I'm going to MIT. It's where all
Yeah.
the best space scientists come out of. And they're like, well, we'd love to have you, but there's a Jewish quota. You can't come. And I'm like, okay, so if that was me, I would say, well, screw you. I'll go to Harvard or something. And he goes, no, I went to NYU for a year and then transferred in.
That's right. Yeah, you
I'm
only
like,
got
what?
one.
Why? Because he was like,
Yeah, you
because
only
it was the
got one
best.
life. You got one life to live, man. You can't, and these prejudices and biases will lock you down. There's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of musicians that we'll never hear of. They just never stuck it out, and luckily there'll be some accounting of Cleve Francis's music, when I'm gone. So
Well, it's like that
I'm
story
trying.
where Alan Lomax goes down to, the farm where Muddy Waters, McKinley Morganfield is working, and he had never heard the sound of his own voice in a recorded medium, right? And he like played it back to him, and he was like, well, yeah, this is pretty good. I gotta get out of here.
That's right. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, representation matters. You got to be able to see that doctor in that clinic to know, like, oh yes, I can also do this. You have to hear someone like Richie Havens or maybe Bill Withers to be like, oh yeah, I can take my guitar, be a folk musician, and be black. But like, not enough people somehow got to be recognized, in time in a way, because
Yeah.
that
I mean, I think
that
I was
trend
passed
passed.
overall. I wasn't trying to do that, but I looked like the music would have gotten to somebody, by now. It was that good. And but you know, I think people are beginning to put my music together, which is kind of nice. And I've recorded if you listen to my 3 CDs on Capitol, I've covered a whole range of music. Recorded some Hugh Presswood music, recorded Bill Anderson, Tips of My Fingers, and uh, so a lot of great music that I was able to get my hands on and record, and coupled with my own stuff, I think. But I'm really happy with the Beneath the Beyond the Willow Tree album, because that was the beginning. That was my very first recording.
You have a song called "You Do My Heart Good,"
Right.
which actually charted. Um, when you heard your voice like on the radio, when you heard it sort of being played around, sort of like a Garth Brooks or a Marty Stewart record, did it feel surreal? Did it feel like?
Oh yeah, I just couldn't believe, at that time I would just close my eyes and said, I don't believe this, like somebody's playing it on the radio or in the car, or even see the videos come up on CMT. And it was a long, it was a long journey. I mean, and I was just, was not going to let a moment go by, but I was it blew my mind, actually.
There was, you know, the, of course, you experienced the 92 LA riots after Rodney King was beaten up, and then obviously the OJ Simpson trial. When you see stuff like George Floyd now, does it feel like deja vu over and over again? Does it feel like one more small step forward, or does it feel like there needs to be so much more done before there's an actual step forward?
Oh yeah, you have to constantly fight racism on a daily basis. I mean, the the South really never lost the war. they they seem to regroup, every now and then they'll come back as the Klan, and they come back in different political parties and stuff like that. So there's always that group. They really never give up, and you have to just get more people, and it can't be just only blacks fighting this. It has to be whites and blacks, and and any colors in between, because that's very detrimental to the future generations. I mean, you can't keep this up. You cannot keep this up, and we can't promise our kids that yeah, you can be anything you want to be, and life is fair, and tolerate. And I think the biggest problem is when people ignore or don't say anything because it doesn't affect them,
Hmm.
directly. That's the most dangerous crowd of people, who just see it and say, it's not right, but don't do anything to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
In this, when we had that Black Lives Matter protests across the country after George Floyd, the interesting thing about that thing was that there was many white kids in those rallies as blacks. And it was the first time you had seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And it went on for days and for months, and so people join in. So we're not going to let our children grow up in a world, like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was in those marches and right down Hollywood Boulevard. It was like we're marching right down Hollywood Boulevard with the stars and the Walk of Fame, and the cops are shooting tear gas at people. I mean, it's like this bizarre, again, like you feel like you're in a movie that you watched, from your parents' day, when they would
Yes.
march against the Vietnam War, or uh, you know, across the Pettus Bridge with Martin Luther King. It's like you have to keep marching. It's like you have to keep doing it, or
Yeah.
people forget, and I think music now um has gotten so apolitical that it's lost the knife's edge to make a difference a lot of times, right? Now some people are really speaking out, but most people, especially in country music or mainstream music, wouldn't dare to offend a part of their audience that might be pulled away by a political message, and it's just cowardice in my mind a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. That's true. The latest song I wrote was a song called Buffalo,
Mm,
and I'll have to send that one to you. I wrote that in response to that killing, the
right.
gunning down these 10 people. I wrote a song called Buffalo, and I actually got a letter from the mayor of Buffalo thanking me for the song. But something comes up, I'll get my pen out, write it. I'm not singing it, but I wrote the song. There's another fellow singing it, but I thought some need to be said about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard sometimes as a band leader myself, and we have a horn section. It's a big, fun, soul, funky sound, but then we go into these more harmony folk songs that can be more hushed and quiet and sad, and sometimes the dynamic range is so great that it throws people off. We have this song that we started doing that's mostly a duet about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and women
Wow.
struggling to find a place to, basically be treated like human beings and make their own choice. And we play that in the middle of a set sometimes, and the air just like goes out of the room. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes it's like, well, how do we even recover from that? Okay, here's a love song, um, and I struggle with the idea of like when to insert my opinion into a set, because I've long, gone past the point where I'm not going to speak up about stuff. I probably speak up too much about stuff, but if I don't do it, who's going to do it? A lot of people,
Exactly.
even in the Americana folk world right now, don't do a damn thing to say, what's happening with the Supreme Court, with violence against, Asian folks and gay folks and black folks and trans folks. It's like no one says a damn thing. They just, write another song about falling in love and getting drunk and,
Well, that was one of the things about, financing your own music and doing your own music. You determine what you put out,
right.
which was good. I was like, no, don't record that. No, I'm recording this, and if somebody want to listen to it, they'll hear it.
Now, I still believe also that the most effective type song, even if it's political, still has to be a good song, has to have a hook.
Yes,
And
yes, yeah,
you have a great cover of Dylan's "With God on Our Side," right?
Yes, yes.
And again, it's like that's almost slam poetry, building and building and building, with God on our side being this acidic barb that keeps hitting you, and that's always the hardest thing to reconcile in this country, is that the folks who are taking away women's rights are saying, well, that's God's will. God doesn't want you to have the choice.
Right.
And that's, how do you argue with that? So it's like an impossible argument.
But that's one of the songs that I heard from Bob Dylan, and I just like, God, because we as blacks, I mean, we fought in every war that there is, that they would let us fight in, and yet when you came back, you couldn't eat at a restaurant, or you couldn't do that, and so I was very much. I wasn't anti-war, but I'm saying you're using God as an excuse to do this. I mean, which God are you talking about? And I thought that song was very significant.
You remember the first concert that you saw?
I think, God, that's a long way back. I did see Dylan in concert.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I did. I did do a Bob Dylan, but I was years after I'd gone into practice. But I don't remember the first one. It probably was an R&B concert. That was me. But I've been to them all now.
There weren't a lot of exciting acts coming through Jennings.
No. Basically, it was gospel acts. I used to be in a gospel quartet. We used to do revivals and stuff like that, and sing gospel music. So there was no R&B or folk or nothing in Jennings. Jennings is about like a couple thousand people off the interstate. Not a lot happening there.
I'm actually going down to New Orleans for a few days with my family and some friends. Maybe we'll drive up there, see what's happening.
The Jennings, yeah. I mean, it's known for food more than anything. It was like basically rice farming and stuff like that.
Okay.
But it's a little town, not too much going on. My mother was saying, you got to get out of here. This is a town you've got to get out of. But I've gone back there and spoken to the church since I've been a doctor, which is interesting.
If you could play any song that you wrote, let's say you're the headlining set at a huge music festival right in the mall in DC. Let's say we're inaugurating a new president, and you get to play any of your music. What would you play? With the whole world watching.
I play the Willow Tree.
Go for the hit.
Huh? Yep. Yeah. I play the Willow Tree because that was my whole song, and I wrote that when I was like 16 years old. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was coming out of my head. but I think I'd put it all together, like just going under the tree is not going to relieve all your ills, man. But like you got to stop there just for a minute and take a breather, but go back out and fight it even when the world doesn't believe you. So if you look at the lyrics, I mean, I was laying down some heavy lyrics when I was 16. But the Willow Tree is that song.
I really appreciate all the stuff you've created, and obviously that you've helped so many people in your medical practice. My wife, in her crazy ordeal, giving birth to our daughter, had heart failure, lungs, her kidneys, and it was a total scary thing. And due to her amazing doctors at Cedars-Sinai, she's, doing great. It's a long road ahead, but
postpartum cardiomyopathy, is that what it was?
It's a syndrome called atypical hemolytic uremic disorder, AHUS, which is very rare. It's like 500 people have it in the country.
Oh my God.
And we had a lot of amazing folks, help out in the few months when the baby was here, and she was basically in dialysis and not coming back from the hospital. But her recovery has been pretty miraculous, due to the fact that she was in the right place at the right time. They caught it very quickly. And if she was in, some small town somewhere, she'd probably be gone,
Yeah, miracles do happen, man. And I'm glad to see the medical people come through. That's what we're there for. And then once you're alive, we'll give you a song.
That's right. Well, she's from Northern Virginia originally, so maybe we'll, have her heart looked at by you one of these days. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much it's quite an honor to be on your show and seeing some of the people you've interviewed, and hopefully that my interview will contribute.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to do, talk to folks about the music they create. And I love folks like you that have real history that they've seen and created themselves. Most of us, quote unquote, young folks, we're still trying to figure it out. So it's great to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.